The blade is a promise against the grey dawn, a cold, sharpened silhouette against a sky the colour of bruised flesh. The air in the Place de la Révolution is thick, humming with a strange energy. It smells of damp earth, of unwashed bodies, of anticipation. Thousands of faces, a sea of wool and worn leather, are turned towards the single, terrible structure, the guillotine. They call it the National Razor, a title that is both a joke and a threat. Today, it is not for a common criminal, not for a traitorous general. Today, it waits for a queen, Marie Antoinette. The name itself is a whisper, a curse, a fragment of a forgotten world. Her carriage ride through Paris was a gauntlet of hate. She saw the hollow eyes, heard the raw-throated screams. A basse électricienne. Down with the Austrian woman. The cobblestones, still slick from an early morning rain, reflected the torches of the National Guard, creating a wavering, hellish path leading only here. Now, she stands at the foot of the scaffold. Her hands are bound behind her back. A priest mutters something she does not hear. Her once famous hair, now streaked with premature grey, is cropped short, exposing the nape of her neck. She wears a simple white chemise, a stark contrast to the gowns of silver and silk that once defined her. The crowd is not a roar now, but a low, guttural murmur. They are waiting. She is 37 years old. Her eyes, a pale blue that once sparkled with mischief at the opera, now scan the faces before her. She does not see individuals, but a single, monstrous entity. The entity that took her husband, Louis XVI, just months before. The entity that took her son, the Dauphin, locking him away in a tower to be corrupted and broken. The entity that stripped her of every title, every dignity, until only this name remained, Widow Capet. She takes a single, shaky breath. The smell of the mob, the metallic scent of the blade, the dampness of the air, it all coalesces into one final, overwhelming sensation. She does not know that her last words, moments ago, were an apology for stepping on the executioner's foot. A flicker of the old etiquette, even now. The wooden steps are rough beneath her thin slippers. The executioner's assistants move with a brutal, practiced efficiency. There is no speech, no final declaration, just the cold, curved wood of the lunette being lowered over her neck, enclosing her world in darkness. Then, a sound, a rush of air, a heavy, wet thwack that is swallowed by the sudden, explosive roar of the crowd. A cheer that seems to shake the very foundations of Paris. The head is shown to the people. The eyes are wide. The mouth is slack. The Queen of France is dead. The story of how this moment came to be is not just one of revolution. It is a story of a girl who was never meant to be a queen, a life lived in a gilded cage, and a nation that bled itself dry for an idea. It is a story of a downfall so complete, so catastrophic, that its echo still haunts us today. 18 years before the blade fell, a 14-year-old archduchess crossed the border from her native Austria into France. Her name was Marie Antoinette, but she would leave that girl behind. She was a pawn in a great political game, a living treaty sent to seal the alliance between the Bourbons and the Habsburgs. The handover ceremony at a remote, custom-built pavilion on the border was a surreal and humiliating spectacle. She was stripped, literally and figuratively, of her Austrian past. Her clothes, her servants, even her pet pug, were taken from her. She was scrubbed and redressed in the French fashion, becoming Marie Antoinette, Dauphine of France. She arrived at the court of Versailles. To the modern eye, it was a palace of unimaginable opulence. But to those within, it was a gilded prison, a labyrinth of suffocating ritual. The air was thick with the cloying scent of powdered wigs, orange blossom perfume, and the underlying musk of bodies kept hidden beneath layers of silk. Every moment of the day was a public performance. The lever, the royal waking, was a choreographed ballet of courtiers vying for the honor of handing the monarch his shirt. The same intricate ceremony was repeated for meals, for walks, for retiring to bed. Marie Antoinette was utterly unprepared. Her education had been neglected. She could barely read or write French, and her spelling remained atrocious her entire life. She was bubbly, impulsive, and loved music, dance, and fun. The ancient, rigid court saw this not as youthful exuberance, but as a profound and dangerous frivolity. The whispers began almost immediately. She was too familiar. She laughed too loudly. She preferred the company of a small, wild circle of friends to the staid, powdered dukes and duchesses who populated the court. And then, there was the silence from the marital bed. For 7 long years, her marriage to the Dauphin, the future Louis XVI, remained unconsummated. The court watched, and waited, and gossiped. The pressure was immense, a constant, silent scream in the gilded halls. Her every glance, every sigh, was documented in malicious dispatches sent to foreign courts. She was called frigid. He was mocked for his lack of interest. This private struggle became a public crisis, a threat to the very succession of the throne. It was here, in this pressure cooker of expectation and humiliation, that Marie Antoinette began to build the walls of her own fortress. She created a world within a world. Just a short walk from the main palace, she built the Petit Trianon, an elegant neoclassical haven. Louis XVI gave it to her as a gift, a retreat. And at the Trianon, she made a fatal decree. No royal etiquette was allowed. It was her escape. She built a rustic hamlet, the Hameau de la Reina, with a working farm, a mill, and cottages with thatched roofs. Here, she and her friends would dress as milkmaids and shepherdesses, pretending at a simple, pastoral life while the real French peasantry starved. She was playing a part, seeking an innocence the court had stolen from her. But outside the walls of Versailles, a different story was being told. The whispers became pamphlets, crude and vicious. They called her Madame Deficit. They depicted her in cartoons as a decadent, monstrous harpy, draining the treasury with her extravagance. The most infamous lie, the one that would seal her fate in the public imagination, was the affair of the diamond necklace. A cardinal, duped by a cunning con artist, was tricked into buying an astronomically expensive necklace he believed was for the Queen. Marie Antoinette knew nothing of it. She had rejected the necklace as too expensive. But the scandal broke, and the mud stuck. The public, already seething with resentment, now believed their queen was not just wasteful, but capable of a sordid, criminal conspiracy. She was a spendthrift. She was an adulteress. She was l'Autrichienne, the Austrian bitch. The gilded cage was beginning to splinter. The scent of orange blossoms at the Petit Trianon was now overpowered by the smoke of burning tax records and the acrid smell of fear. The year is 1789. France is bankrupt. A bad harvest has sent the price of bread soaring. In Paris, the queues outside bakeries are long and desperate. The air is heavy with the smell of hunger and injustice. The people, the Third Estate, have had enough. Versailles, meanwhile, seems to exist in a bubble. But the pressure is building. Marie Antoinette, now queen, feels the walls closing in. Her portrait, painted by the famous Madame Vigie Lebrun, shows a woman of serene beauty, a rose in her hand, surrounded by her children. It is a calculated image, an attempt to counter the vile pamphlets, to show her as a mother, a devoted mère de famille. But it is too late. The public sees only the mask. They believe the monster. In the Hall of Mirrors, 1,000 candles reflect in the vast, gleaming glass, illuminating a court still clinging to its rituals. But the reflections are distorted, ghostly. The whispers are no longer just about fashion or favor. They are about a gathering storm. The king, a well-meaning but indecisive man, is out of his depth. He is a locksmith, more comfortable with his keys and mechanisms than with the levers of power. It is Marie Antoinette, the foreigner, who is seen as the power behind the throne. The Austrian committee, they call her inner circle. Every decision is now viewed with suspicion. Then, on June 20th, the Third Estate, locked out of their meeting hall, gathers in an indoor tennis court. The sound of rain hammering on the roof is drowned out by the voices of men, swearing an oath not to disperse until France has a constitution. The tennis court oath. It is a direct challenge to the crown. The air in the room is electric. thick with the sweat of ambition and the breath of revolution. At Versailles, the Queen is alarmed. She urges her husband to be firm, to resist. She sees the revolt not as a cry for justice, but as a disease that must be quarantined. In July, the king makes a catastrophic mistake. He dismisses Jacques Necker, his popular finance minister. The news hits Paris like a thunderclap. To the people, it is a declaration of war. The sound that follows is not of thunder, but of marching feet and the frantic beating of drums. July 14th. The Bastille, a medieval fortress, a symbol of royal tyranny. The mob does not storm it for the handful of prisoners inside. They want the gunpowder. The siege is short, brutal. The governor's head is soon paraded through the streets on a pike, a grim, bloody trophy. The message is clear: no one is safe. When the news reaches Versailles, the Duke of Liancourt wakes the king. Is it a revolt? Louis asks, bleary-eyed. The Duke's reply is chilling. No, sire, it is a revolution. The shockwaves ripple through the palace. The Queen's world is unraveling. The carefully constructed stage of Versailles is being torn down by the audience. The scent of fear is now palpable, a metallic tang in the back of the throat. The king, hoping to appease the people, is forced to travel to Paris and don the revolutionary tricolour cockade. He is a prisoner in all but name. But the point of no return comes on the night of October 5th. A group of market women, furious over the price and scarcity of bread, begin a march from Paris to Versailles. It is a 12-mile procession, a torrent of rage and desperation. They are joined by the National Guard, and soon, thousands are marching through the driving rain. Their target is not just the king. It is the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy. They are coming for the royal family. That night, the palace is on edge. The rain-slicked cobblestones of the Cour de Marbre glisten in the torchlight. The Queen can hear them coming long before she sees them, a deep, roaring hum, like an approaching avalanche. She is in her private apartments, the same ones where she once played her harp and laughed with her friends. Now, she listens to the screams from beyond the gates. The Austrian. We want the Austrian's head. In the early hours of October 6th, the mob breaks into the palace. They storm the stairs, hunting for her apartment. The doors are battered down. Guards are slaughtered, their heads once again raised on pikes outside her windows. The Queen, in a moment of pure terror, flees in her nightgown, barely escaping through a secret passage that leads to the king's apartments. The door to her bedroom is splintered to pieces. The mob tears her bed to shreds, a symbolic violation. The siege ends only when the king agrees to address the crowd from the balcony. He is met with a muted, sullen response. Then, the Queen appears. She knows this is a moment of life or death. She steps forward, her hands clasped, and makes a deep, formal curtsy to the people below. A gesture of submission, a gesture of survival. For a long, terrifying moment, there is silence. Then, a few voices shout, "Long live the Queen." The immediate danger has passed, but the message is seared into her soul. They can reach her. Anytime they want, they can reach her. The next day, the royal family is forced to leave Versailles forever. The carriage ride to Paris is a funeral procession. They are prisoners of the people now. As they pass through the crowds, a man shouts, "We are bringing the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's little boy." They are taken to the Tuileries Palace, a damp, dilapidated place in the heart of the city. It becomes their new, much smaller cage. Marie Antoinette looks out the window not at manicured gardens, but at the angry, unforgiving faces of Paris. The gilded cage is gone. The iron one has just closed around her. The Tuileries Palace was not a home. It was a gilded birdcage, suspended in the heart of a storm. The air here was different. It smelled of the Seine, a muddy, rotting smell, and of the ever-present Parisian crowds whose chants and songs drifted through the windows like a taunt. C-A-I-R-A, C-A-I-R-A. It'll be fine. The aristocrats to the lamppost. The light that filtered through the grimy glass was grey. leaching the color from the fine tapestries and gilded furniture that had been hastily moved from Versailles. Marie Antoinette aged in that place. The mirror, once a friend, now showed her the truth. Fine lines etched the corners of her eyes. Her famous fairness was now a pallor. The vivacious Dauphine was gone, replaced by a wary, tense woman who started at every sudden noise. Her children felt the change. The young Dauphin, Louis Charles, would press his face against the window, confused by the sea of strange faces that stared back, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and hate. For 2 years, this was their life, a pantomime of royalty. They were prisoners playing at being monarchs, forced to appear on the balcony for the public scrutiny, to smile and wave at the very people who held them captive. Behind the scenes, a desperate game was being played. The Queen, who had once dismissed politics as a dull affair for men, became the chief strategist of her own survival. She was the one who wrote the secret, coded letters. She was the one who met with the few loyalists who dared to visit, their faces grim. She was the one who pleaded with her brother, the Emperor of Austria, to intervene, to save them. The king, meanwhile, seemed to retreat into a state of passive resignation. He read his books, he tinkered with his locks, he prayed. He was a man waiting for a sign from God, while his wife was trying to carve a path to salvation with her own hands. This period of forced captivity forged a new Marie Antoinette. The frivolous girl was dead. In her place was a lioness, fighting for her cubs. And so, the plan was born. The flight to Varennes. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble. To escape the suffocating pressure of Paris, to reach the royalist stronghold of Montmedy near the border. There, with an army at his back, Louis could negotiate from a position of strength, or so the theory went. The planning was meticulous and fraught with peril. False passports were obtained. A story was concocted. They would not be the royal family, but the entourage of a Russian baroness. The night of June 20th, 1791, was thick with a tense, humid darkness. Disguises were donned. The Queen wore a simple grey dress and a plain hat, her face partially hidden. The King was dressed as a valet. It was undignified, but it was necessary. Their hearts hammered against their ribs as they were smuggled out of the Tuileries, one by one, through a side door. The smell of the waiting carriage, of leather, horse, and hope, was the sweetest scent they had known in years. For the first hours, it seemed to be working. The carriage, a large, heavy berlin, rumbled through the sleeping countryside. Inside, the mood was cautiously optimistic. The King pointed out landmarks from a map. The children, confused but excited, eventually fell asleep. Marie Antoinette allowed herself a sliver of relief, a feeling so foreign it was almost painful. They were free, but the plan was already unraveling. The carriage was late. The King, against all advice, insisted on stopping. He leaned out the window, engaging commoners in conversation, unable to resist the role of the benevolent monarch. He was recognized. Whispers began to fly ahead of them, faster than the horses could gallop. The air inside the carriage grew stale, the initial hope curdling into a gnawing anxiety. The end came in the small, unremarkable town of Varennes. A small group of men, their faces hard in the flickering light of a single lantern, stood on the bridge leading out of town. They had been tipped off. The local postmaster, a man named Drought, had recognized the King's profile from a coin. The carriage was halted. The door was wrenched open. The scene that followed was one of surreal horror. The National Guardsmen, their breath smelling of cheap wine and the uniforms smelling of sweat, thrust a lantern into the dark interior of the coach. The light fell upon the face of Louis XVI. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, one of the men said, with a kind of reverent terror, "Yes, it is indeed the King." The dream of escape was over. The return journey to Paris was a descent into hell. They were prisoners once more, but this time, there was no pretense. The crowds that lined the road did not cheer. They were silent, a cold, hateful silence. They did not remove their hats. They simply stared, their faces like stone. The message was clearer than any scream. You are not our rulers anymore. You are our captives. When they finally stumbled back into the Tuileries, the air in the palace was frigid with finality. The locks on their doors were reinforced. The guards were doubled. They were back in their cage, but now the door had been welded shut. The flight to Varennes was more than a failed escape. It was a confession of guilt in the eyes of the people. The king and queen had tried to flee. They had rejected the revolution. They had proven themselves to be enemies of the nation. The last shred of their legitimacy had been torn away, left to rot on the road to Varennes. The path was now clear, and it led only one way. The silence in the Tuileries after Varennes was the loudest sound Marie Antoinette had ever heard. It was the silence of a verdict delivered, of hope extinguished. The air itself felt heavy, suffocating, like water filling a sinking ship. The gilded chairs and damask curtains were no longer furnishings. They were the props of a concluded play. The world outside their windows was no longer just a hostile city. It was a confirmed enemy. The failed escape had stripped them of the last vestiges of myth, reducing them to mere mortals awaiting sentence. A year crawled by, a year of tense, suffocating stalemate. Then, in the spring of 1792, the storm finally broke. France declared war on Austria. For Marie Antoinette, this was the ultimate betrayal in the eyes of the people. The Autrichienne was now a literal traitor, a viper in the bosom of the nation. The whispers accused her of passing military secrets to her brother, the emperor. Every French defeat was laid at her door. The air in Paris became thick with the smell of gunpowder and paranoia. The end began on the 10th of August. It started not with a political decree, but with the sound of a tocsin bell, a frantic, metallic clanging that ripped through the humid dawn. Then came the drums, a relentless, martial beat that echoed from the working-class districts. A new, more radical mob was on the march. This was not a procession of market women. This was an army of sans-culottes, armed with pikes, muskets, and a burning desire to end the monarchy once and for all. From a window, the Queen watched them come. A vast, seething tide of humanity, flowing through the streets towards the Tuileries. The morning sun glinted on their bayonets. The sound was a bestial roar, punctuated by the crack of sporadic gunfire. The palace was defended by the Swiss Guard, loyal to the end, and a few hundred National Guardsmen whose loyalty was paper-thin. The king, paralyzed with indecision, was persuaded to take his family to the nearby Manège, the meeting hall of the National Assembly, for their supposed protection. It was a fatal error. As they fled through the gardens, the smell of trampled flowers and damp earth filled their nostrils. They could hear the rising fury of the crowd as they realized the birds had flown from a cage. Abandoned by their king, the Swiss Guard was massacred. The Tuileries were stormed. The furniture was smashed, the art slashed, the wine cellars looted. The palace ran with blood and alcohol, the two smells mingling into a nauseating perfume of revolution. Their new prison was the damp, dark Temple Tower, a medieval fortress in the heart of Paris. This was no gilded cage. It was a stone tomb. The air was cold and smelled of mildew and rat droppings. The only sounds were the tramp of the guards' boots on the stone stairs and the distant, terrifying cheers from the city as the monarchy was officially abolished. They were no longer the royal family. They were the capets, common prisoners. Here, the true horror began. They were stripped of their remaining dignity, their servants, their privacy. Louis XVI was taken from them, tried in a sham court, and executed in January 1793. The sound of the cannon that announced his death rolled over the city and seeped through the cold stones of the temple. Marie Antoinette, now widow Capet, did not scream. She simply turned her face to the wall. Her son, the 8-year-old Louis Charles, was now, in the eyes of the royalists, King Louis XVII. And so, the revolutionaries came for him too. The scene of their separation was one of pure, unadulterated cruelty. Two officials arrived at their door. They were taking the boy. He was to be re-educated, removed from the influence of his corrupt mother. The child clung to her, sobbing. She fought like a wild animal, her screams echoing in the small, stone room. She begged, she pleaded. She was a queen, a mother, but in that moment, she was nothing. They'd pried her son from her arms. The sound of his fading cries as he was dragged down the spiral staircase was a sound that would haunt her until her last breath. It was a wound that no blade could ever inflict. Alone in the darkness, she was broken. She would spend hours just sitting, staring at nothing. She could still smell her son's hair on the pillow. She could still feel the ghost of his small hand in hers. Her daughter, Marie Antoinette, was her only comfort, a silent, traumatized shadow. Then, in the dead of night on August 2nd, 1793, they came for her. She was transferred to the Conciergerie, the antechamber of death. The Conciergerie was a different kind of hell. It was damp, crowded, and the air was a foul cocktail of unwashed humanity, disease, and despair. The stone walls wept with condensation. She was placed in a small, dank cell that had once been a small office. They called it the council chamber. A single, high window let in a sliver of grey light. A narrow bed, a table, a stove. This was where she would wait. Her final trial was approaching. The prosecution began to build its case, scraping together every lie, every slander, every twisted half-truth from the past 20 years. The Queen of France was about to be judged not for her crimes, but for her legend. The cell in the Conciergerie was a world of damp stone and perpetual twilight. The air was a physical presence, cold and heavy with the smell of the Seine's mud, of mildew, and of the despair that seeped from the very stones. This was not a place for living. It was a waiting room for the guillotine. They called it the antechamber of death. For Marie Antoinette, it was the final, brutal reduction of a life. She was prisoner 280. No name. No title, just a number. Her days took on a grim, monotonous rhythm. The scrape of the iron bolt on her door at mealtimes. The hollow echo of her own footsteps on the stone floor. The constant, low murmur from the other cells. Sobs, prayers, the occasional burst of defiant song that was always silenced. She was watched ceaselessly. 2 gendarmes sat in her cell, day and night. Their eyes followed her every move. Their breath, smelling of cheap tobacco and onion soup, was a constant reminder she was never alone. She had become a ghost. Her hair, once her crowning glory, was now entirely white. It was cut short, roughly, for the executioner's convenience. Her body was skeletal, racked with the bleeding that signaled uterine cancer. The vibrant woman of Trianon was gone. In her place was a wraith in a shabby black dress, her face a mask of quiet dignity etched with profound exhaustion. She spent her hours sewing, her needle moving in and out of the fabric with a steady, mechanical rhythm. A final, futile attempt to impose order on the chaos. Outside her cell, the revolution was consuming its own. The reign of terror was in full, bloody swing. The streets of Paris echoed with the rumble of the tumbrils, the carts that carried the condemned to the Place de la Révolution. The sound of the blade falling was a regular, almost mundane, punctuation to the city's life. The public prosecutor, a fanatical and ruthless man named Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, was building his case against her. It was not a case of evidence, but of mythology. He gathered every pamphlet, every slander, every whispered rumor from the past 2 decades. The trial began on October 14th, 1793, in the grand, echoing hall of the Revolutionary Tribunal. The air was thick with the heat of hundreds of bodies and the smell of anticipation. They had brought her here in a curtained carriage, through streets lined with a hateful, screaming crowd. She entered the courtroom, a small, frail figure, and the entire room fell silent for a moment, stunned by her appearance. This was not the monstrous Madame Deficit they had been promised. This was a dying woman. The charges were a grotesque caricature of her life. She was accused of orchestrating the orgy at Versailles, of plotting the massacre of the Swiss Guard, of bankrupting the nation, of incest with her own son. The last charge was calculated to destroy any last vestige of sympathy. It was based on the coerced testimony of the terrified, broken boy, forced to sign a document accusing his mother of unspeakable acts. For 2 days, she endured it. She stood in the dock, her hands clasped in front of her back straight. She answered the questions with a calm, clear voice that belied her condition. She defended herself not as a queen, but as a mother, a wife, a woman. When the vile accusation of incest was read aloud, a gasp went through the crowd. For the first time, her composure broke. She turned to the spectators in the galleries, her eyes blazing with a final, defiant fire. "If I have not replied," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of outrage and profound hurt, "it is because nature itself refuses to answer such a charge laid against a mother." She appealed to all the mothers in the room. For a moment, the tide of hate seemed to waver, but the verdict was never in doubt. It was a show trial, and the script had been written long before she ever entered the courtroom. After 36 hours of relentless interrogation, the jury retired. They returned in less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was death. Execution within 24 hours. She heard the words without a flinch. She was led back to her cell in the Conciergerie. The iron bolt shot home behind her for the last time. She asked for a pen and paper. In the flickering candlelight, the smell of hot wax mixing with the damp, she wrote a final, heartbreaking letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. It was a letter of love, of forgiveness for her enemies, and of profound sorrow for those she was leaving behind. She begged her children not to seek vengeance for her death. The letter, intercepted by the jailers, would never be delivered. Dawn on October 16th arrived, grey and cold. The executioner, Henri Sanson, came to her cell. He asked her to turn around so he could bind her hands. She offered them without protest. "Must I be bound?" she asked, her voice quiet. It was her only complaint. He apologized, explaining it was the law. He cut her hair, the white locks falling to the stone floor. She was helped into a plain white dress, the costume of the condemned. The ride to the scaffold was a final journey through the city that had hated her for so long. She sat in the tumbril, her hands tied behind her back, facing backwards. The cart jolted over the cobblestones. The crowds were immense, their screams a deafening wall of sound. She did not look at them. Her eyes were fixed on something in the distance, something only she could see. Perhaps it was the gardens of Trianon. Perhaps it was the face of her son. She maintained a perfect, icy composure. The priest accompanying her, a constitutional clergyman, tried to offer her comfort. She ignored him. The scaffold rose before them, a stark, brutal structure against the pale sky. The blade, freshly sharpened, gleamed dully. She ascended the steps with a grace that shocked the watching crowd. There was no hesitation, no final words for them. Her last moment was a whisper of apology, not to God or to France, but to the executioner for accidentally stepping on his foot. Then, the cold wood, the darkness of the lunette, and the swift, terrible descent. The roar of the crowd was the last sound she ever heard. The head was shown, as was the custom. The executioner held it aloft by its white hair. The crowd cheered, a sound of primal release. The body was thrown into an unmarked grave in the Madeleine Cemetery. Quicklime poured over it to hasten its dissolution. The Queen of France was gone, erased. But the legend, the story of her downfall, was just beginning. It would become a ghost that haunted Europe for a century, a cautionary tale of revolution and revenge of a woman who was in the end neither a monster nor a saint, but a human being caught in the grinding wheels of history.